Welcome to the Open Fire Podcast, the home of frank, honest and thoughtful conversation about fire safety, the construction industry and the ethics therein. My name is Dave Calvert, Operations Director at Frankham Management Services, and with me in the studio I have CAD, scoundrel and all-round ruffian, Tom Gilbert.
Hi, how are you?
I'm trying to up the ante on your introductions.
Okay, I feel like that ante's gone down though. I don't feel like that was an uplift.
Until you actually give me an introduction to read out about you, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make up a new one each week.
So it's fine. I'll take that all day long.
You can't write your own reviews.
No, you can't write your own reviews. This is very true.
You might notice I've changed the introduction around a little bit.
Mm-hmm. You did get fed up with reading it.
But in common with that, we need to advise our readers there might be some continuity errors in the order that our episode's going out.
Yes, the other thing is I think they're going to struggle to read the podcast. But anyway.
Yeah, okay. Listeners or readers, whatever.
That's it.
Viewers. So we were just to explain to our viewers and listeners and readers that we're recording episodes in a certain order, but we're releasing them in a different order.
We are.
And what is the reason for that, Tom?
So there's an element of making sure the right episodes go out when they are relevant. So we've obviously created lots of episodes and we will get to relevance every now and again. So we'll drop an episode out there. And the other one, I think from a continuity perspective, it's just really exciting to watch your diet yo-yo. Your weight's going to yo-yo throughout as you go on your weight loss journey.
It because, like you have said on previous episodes, how much weight have you lost?
Yes.
And it will appear to the casual viewer that 1 week I've lost 2 stone.
Next week you gain 3.
Yeah. And also that we have the backdraft photograph, signed photograph on our table.
Yes.
So yet we haven't explained how that suddenly appeared in the last week. But that will be explained in a later episode. Are we agreed?
We are agreed, although the episode that explains why that's there has already been released. Yes.
Oh, this is all very Back to the Future, isn't it?
It is. It's really, really exciting. I think the only thing I want to mention more than anything is Anthony, who you're going to introduce in a minute, who's a good friend of ours. You didn't wear a tie for him.
No,
but you did wear one for the sirs, which I think is really unfair.
Anthony's very casual, very laid back, very relaxed about this sort of thing.
Yeah.
I feel he would find it intimidating
if you wore a tie.
I were to wear a tie.
Yeah,
he would think there's some sort of.
This is true.
I'm just glad he's got his buttons done up. Well, more buttons than usual.
More buttons than usual. I really like your waistcoat. If only more old people commented on it while you were sat outside pubs, Dave.
Yeah, I did get a few nice comments today, didn't I?
You did. It did make you jump.
Okay, so you've already mentioned who we've got on today. To introduce our guest, he's the director and owner of Robson Frankham Fire Engineering Company. Obviously, a very good friend of mine as well, working at Frankham, and an old friend of yours, indeed.
Absolutely.
Old friend, not an ex-friend, but an old friend.
Yeah, we had a really rough day, and now we don't talk.
Yeah. Welcome to the sofa, Anthony.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So we're going to be talking to Anthony about talking to you, in fact, about the whole world of EWS1s, FREWs, where they came from, what they mean, what they stand for, and where we are now with them, and just trying to demystify that whole area. I know your company, Robson Frankham, has been very involved in in-scope buildings and FREWs in that area.
I don't know if it's partly being dragged into it or sort of responding to the industry needs, but it's obviously quite at the forefront of what we're doing.
So, so to sort of kind of start us off with, like, to EWS1 certificates, they were introduced some time ago by Robert Jenrick's tenure as Housing Secretary in the government. So we're talking around about 2020, 2021,
yep.
Sort of maybe 2019. Can you just start off by explaining to us, specifically EWS1s, before we go any further, why they were introduced, and then we'll go on to what went wrong with their introduction?
Yeah, I think off the back of Grenfell, obviously, there was a lot of concern around extendable fire safety, as we all know. People knee-jerk surveys, ripping cladding off, all sorts of things going on. I think the EWS1 was a good idea in a sense that the government and RICS teamed up to try and produce a certificate that would allow effectively a building to be given a clean bill of health, which would, make residents feel more comfortable, dare I say, allow people to remortgage, and just generally give a bit more safety, a feeling of safety to those within buildings. But they did it alongside some professional bodies like the IFE as well. We'll come to it, but I think Tom was slightly involved in the process. But unfortunately, they didn't involve some of the more key stakeholders like the lenders, the banks, who then just took it upon themselves to use it as a complete, not a valuation tool, but a yes-no tool. And buildings that didn't have the reasonable criteria of EWS1 were zero value properties, and which meant a lot of people, I think there's still people now that are living in flats that effectively have zero value.
So you mentioned there that Tom was responsible for this crisis. Tom, I think what Anthony's referring to there, so there was right at the start, and we are going back to 2019, shortly after Grenfell, there was you were involved in a steering group maybe, or a round table kind of thing with Ricks. Do you want to maybe just elaborate that on the acorn that became EWS1s?
So I would definitely say that I'm not responsible.
Okay.
I'd just like to make that perfectly clear. Although just by being in that room, I guess there's a lot of partial responsibility for all of it. I think my observation of the perception of the EWS1 form has always been that it's a safety tool. Right. It's been there to give comfort and credibility to a building, to give the occupants some comfort that it is in a safe situation. And if it's not, that there is some sort of plan that allows them to get from where they are to a slightly better rating on the EWS1.
And it's not as simple as, it's got combustible materials, it's wrong. You've got various ratings you can choose from, A1, A2, B1, B2.
Absolutely.
And there's a tool to say, actually, you have got combustible materials, but it's still safe.
Yes, 100%. So the original, and this is my opinion based on the things that I were around at the time. There was a meeting that was convened initially that started to talk about external wall systems and how they were inherently dangerous and what did we need to do. It was a big meeting, 50 odd people at Ricks went to that meeting. That eventually turned into a working group that effectively created the first version of the EWS1. And my view on that meeting was that the EWS1 was certainly not a safety tool, right? The EWS1 was a direct response, in my view, of the situation where mortgage providers and valuers were in a place of discomfort. And the reason it all started was because surveyors had started to look at the outside walls of blocks of flats, which they'd never done before. No. They'd never even looked. And all of a sudden they were looking at brick-built buildings and saying, is that ACM? And obviously it isn't. And, they look at ACM buildings and go, wow, that's all right. So they really didn't know what they were looking at. And as a result of that, they were starting to say, no, I don't think it's valued at that, because if that whole wall system needs to be replaced, and by the way, I don't know if it does, would be the caveat, then there's going to be a significant amount of money. So as a result of that, all of the flats that needed to be sold couldn't be, because the surveying companies weren't willing to say they were okay, which meant that mortgage providers would not lend money against them. Now, the reality is that's problematic for Mrs. Miggins in a one-bedroom flat in Cheam, right? That's a problem. But for big house builders, that's a really big problem, because obviously their whole bread and butter is selling new builds. And I think the drive for the initial part of the EWS1 really was to get the housing market moving again, because it completely ground to a halt.
Yeah.
No one was selling anything, no one was moving, no one was buying anything. And I think for all of the right reasons that we see now, that it's a safety tool, when it started, of course, you had an EWS1 form that you'd sign. There was no report that went with it.
No, it was just a form.
It was just sign the form.
There was no fixed criteria, so it was just the most subjective form ever. And
no guidance.
There were people out there that would have signed, that were signing anything and everything as being safe, and there were other people saying everything was unsafe, even though potentially it wasn't.
Absolutely. And then we started to get people starting to write reports that would back up the certificate. And then beyond that, you then started to get guidance that would come out of Ricks, and then that guidance was obviously questioned, and then it was for certain sorts of buildings, but not all. And then the EWS1 started to morph and modify and start.
So there was an added complication in that, to my understanding. I think John Powell wrote an article in Inside Housing way back in 2021, saying how EWS1 essentially brought the construction industry to the mortgage industry to paralysis. on the basis that insurers didn't want to insure fire experts to go out and do EWS1s, because then you're carrying a legacy of potentially. Do you want to just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it probably, a lot of it hinges on the fact that I don't think that, well, as far as I'm aware, correct me if I'm wrong, but the lenders and banks were not involved in the conversations around the form in the first place.
They were all in the same room.
But really were they?
Yep.
Was that insurance as well, though?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know insurers were involved, but I think
UKBI, I think it is.
Oh, okay.
Like King of British. So there's an insurers group. Government sat in that meeting. House builders sat in that meeting. Surveyors sat in that meeting. All of the big surveying firms sat in that meeting. There were chartered fire engineers from all of the big firms. Well, I'll say all of the big firms. That's not quite true. There were 4 fire engineers in there from varying degrees of firms. There were developers in that room, which is why I sat in that room at that time, because obviously I worked for a developer. I was told
there was no lenders or banks involved.
They're all in there.
Oh, right, brilliant. Well, all in there. It makes it even worse then, because obviously the form was initially set up for effectively over 18-metre buildings.
Yeah.
All those covered in loads and loads of cladding.
Yeah.
But primarily the form just says on it for buildings over 18 metres.
Yes, it did.
But then as soon as the lenders got hold of that, it wasn't just buildings over 18 metres. It was every building, not just even flats, even terrace houses they wanted EWS1s for. So it just completely blew everything out of proportion, which, like you say, just ground the market to a halt. And I think eventually I got the impression the lenders seemed to be a bit more educated and then started applying them more correctly. Albeit there was still no criteria at the time to actually do a survey again, so it was still very subjective.
Well, as Tom was sort of alluding to, there was various guidance notes that came out, and then eventually they were amalgamated again under Robert Jenrick's tenure into one single guidance note.
Yeah, they were all very pointed, the guidance notes. Like, there was a balcony one, there was an ACM one, there was a non-ACM
very specific
one. Yeah, very specific. They weren't survey tools as such. It was just kind of guidance around different external wall materials. Without really giving you the answers. But the government, they did a lot. They did a lot of tests, didn't they, on HPL and different types of insulation and stuff like that did help the industry in terms of knowing stuff, what was potentially safe, what wasn't, what was acceptable, what wasn't. Until we'll come on to until PAS 990 came out.
So the evolution from EWS1s, maybe bear in mind not everybody who listens to us is a fire expert, can you explain how we got from EWS1s to the development of FRAEWs and what the key differences are and what the purpose of them are?
So it's a bit of a weird contrast, but if you think of like an FRA, fire risk assessment, obviously there's always been kind of guidance around about until PAS 79 came out that was released by Colin Todd. There was no real criteria or template or anything to form how you do your assessment, or how you inspect, how you investigate, how you come to conclusions. And I think the EWS1 form is effectively the FRA type document in this scenario. And then the PAS came out, which gave you the FRAEW, the fire risk appraisal of external walls. And that was your PAS 79, and told you how to do the assessment, what you need to look at. And very quickly, RICS updated the EWS1 form to actually say this form should be backed up by a PAS 990 FRAEW. Because it actually set out the guidelines and what you need to investigate, how you do it, when do you need to do a PAS, when don't you need to do one. It just made it a lot clearer for everybody doing the investigations and brought a bit more consistency to the industry.
Well, it didn't make it clearer in terms of acronyms because they could have from FRAEW.
Yeah, because the FRA was... Yeah, but it doesn't. It's not even fire risk assessment externals, it's fire risk appraisal just to make it...
Indeed, But, don't forget, as I say, not everyone's an expert. We talk about lay persons who are trying to manage buildings. So who should be doing an FRAEW?
I think so. RICS have done their own course, an external investigation course, which is how effectively people should be doing the FRAEWs. Anyone that's done that. Anyone who, generally with a lot of this stuff, you can get all the qualifications you want, but a lot of it's experience-based. Mm-hmm. And, even within Frankham, we've got people, we're training them up, we're getting people out, we're, showing them working on the smaller buildings and working up to some of the bigger stuff, more complex stuff. A lot of it, you can do all the courses you want, but until you've actually been out there and opened up a building.
But it's certainly, again, with 8670 and whatnot, there's a requirement to demonstrate
100% competency. Yeah, you wouldn't just throw something blind.
I think that's important to get out to our listeners, viewers, watchers and readers that, don't just send anyone. They need to be able to demonstrate their competence.
And that's also what I'm saying, there's a step process. Like, even if someone's done the course, you don't send them straight out to a 20-storey tower and with 5 types of cladding. You might send them on a 5 or 6-storey building with a couple of wall types. Just you've got to build up that experience and get used to what you're doing.
Okay, it's very useful. Just while we're on the subject of just sort of breaking down definitions and such like, so much has been made since Grenfell and in the recent Part 2 report of terminology like the Class 0 test on surface of products and the term limited combustibility, which is quite a high standard, but again, to the layperson, limited combustibility sounds a bit tenuous. It's not a great description for something that is generally quite good.
And actually,
could you maybe just explain? So yeah, what I was going to get to in a roundabout way is, can you just explain Class 0 as a standard, what was wrong with that and what happened to it and what it's been replaced with, and then perhaps explain the difference between that and limited combustibility?
Yeah, so the class system, Class 0, it's a surface spread of frame, surface, I'm going to get it right in a minute, surface spread of flame classification. So effectively, you could take the most combustible material in the world, cover it in foil, and that would be Class 0. It's got no bearing on the calorific value or the potential fire load within that product.
It's purely the surface
Purely
spread,
the surface.
nothing to do with how whether the whole thing will catch fire.
Yeah. You could literally get a load of petrol, put it in a foil bag and hold it up, and that would be Class 0.
And that's Class 0.
Yeah.
And for the point, in means of escape in buildings, you would paint the means of escape
In the
with
class,
a
yeah,
Class
and that was the
0 product
intention of
back
that,
in the day, right?
that
was the
classification. Yeah, and admittedly, there were, in the guidance at the time in approved document B, it did talk about having parts of buildings at different heights. You could have combustible materials, but provided the surface was Class 0 and stuff like that. So the guidance wasn't particularly clear, as we all know.
So at the time of Grenfell, the guidance was
No, so there were still restrictions on the combustibility of materials as well, but there was opportunity within the guidance to do certain things that would be Class 0 and be considered safe, albeit when you got through into the sort of finer print of the document, insulation materials and things like that still had to be non-combustible.
So the term limited combustibility, how does that differ from Class 0?
Well, limited combustibility itself doesn't actually mean anything anymore, really. It's sort of a term that's gone, and over the years the definition of that's actually changed, which I found infuriating. I've looked back through some of the older versions of approved document B, and at one point what we're considering now as Euro Class B would have been categorised as material of limited combustibility. So that term's just been wiped away now, and you've got effectively non-combustible and combustible. So non-combustible would be Euro Class A1, A2, and then anything B downwards would be considered combustible. So they completely wiped it away because it has been so unclear over the years, albeit in the guidance it did refer to materials of combustibility and give a Euro Class recommendation.
Yes. Yeah. I think that there is an awful lot of people that are very, very critical of approved document B, particularly the way that approved document B, in their view, allowed the products that we saw on Grenfell Tower, and obviously in a lot of the buildings that you will have seen since in your kind of FRAW and EWS1 journey as a fire engineer. The reality, of course, is that it's almost like we're in the first situation that we've seen visually where approved guidance, as in approved document B, doing what that guidance told you to do, and this is on the assumption that people did do what it told you to do, but the assumption is that even if you met that part of that approved document, you wouldn't have met building regs. Do you know, it's really tough because obviously I was working on buildings before Grenfell and new build design, and our involvement as fire engineers was fairly limited to the point where we were very rarely appointed beyond sort of REBA stage 4 in the early stage 4 design. Never got involved in any of the actual construction details or any of those sort of, and you just put you'd set performance criteria, right?
Yeah, that's it. Performance specification only. Didn't really look at, wasn't a point to look at the drawings.
Yeah.
And then that's where you ended up with your Grenfells and other buildings as such, where people were putting stuff on buildings because insulation was a very important thing. So people were looking at Part L, sustainability, that side of thing, and then fire was almost parked a little bit. I think it will go cyclical, and I'd imagine at some Part L was very, very important still. But at the minute, fire is definitely taking priority because sometimes you have to give a little bit on Part L, and a good example of that is district heating pipe work.
Yeah.
If you're taking pipe work through a wall, a compartment wall, that wall might be a 2-hour fire-rated wall, and you've got to do it. But actually, when you talk to the company that's providing the heating, they say, well, no, we need to continue our lagging all the way through.
Yes.
So, and previously, I know that happened. Now it's like, well, no, if fire safety takes precedence, you've got to put a collar in there, get your lagging off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think Okay, just moving on to sort of bringing it a bit more up to date, and this is probably, I'll put the question to you first, Dan, although Tom, you might want to chip in. Given that all the chaos with EWS1 forms and mortgage providers essentially withdrawing from the high-rise market, not wishing to, provide mortgages, therefore people in blocks, even today, 7 years later, trapped in their homes, can't sell. And this is a position that's still being unwound.
Yeah.
Can you sort of elaborate on the current situation? Why are people still in that same situation if we've got, if this process has moved on?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's strip it back, really. Obviously, we started doing EWS1 forms and external investigations 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 years ago. We've had PADs now for 2.5, 3 years now. And it's all kind of developing, and a lot of buildings have been investigated. Still, there's buildings being investigated. So people may have been in a situation where their flat may have been investigated 2, 3 years ago. But, it's not a quick, okay, we'll just get someone in, rip it all off and do it again. It's a case of, right, we need to get, designs put in place, that people are looking at accountability, who's going to pay for it. It's not a very quick process. And ultimately, and this sounds really awful, but what's going to happen is because there's so many buildings that need work, and we've looked at loads of buildings, I'm sure you have as well, where almost every building's got some form of defect. Sometimes it's mitigated and there's reasons you can say it's actually acceptable. Other times it's like, well, sorry, you're going to have to take the facade off. That's going to be put in priority order, so it's going to be a case of probably highest risk first, I'd imagine, or in some cases probably who shouts the loudest. It's all going to be put in different priority orders, and people will be waiting 10 years probably till some of the buildings are fixed.
Yeah.
Tom, do you echo that view? I mean, the reasons for why people are still in that position and unable to get a mortgage.
Yeah.
Is it down? 2 or 3 years. I would guess somebody sitting in their flat would say, "Well, that's quite a long time to have got the cladding off. Surely you could have done it by now."
Oh yeah.
Is it down to who pays for it?
I think and I know why you're asking that question, and I will come to what you actually want to ask me. I think it's the difficulty I have with it is that as someone who's not in that bit of the industry anymore, I don't think that the people that are listening to this who aren't in social housing I don't think they would realise that there's still even a problem around people not being able to get mortgages and stuck in their flats anymore. And I think there is virtually zero noise about that in the media at all. The only noise we've had about external wall replacements really was when the MP said that she wanted to accelerate it all.
Yeah.
And obviously the problem with that is Gateway 2, right? And good luck
accelerating
that.
I was going to bring that up as
and
well.
I think we'll definitely get into the Gateway 2 bit. But I think the biggest issue really is around who's paying.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And I think the government...
The government produced a package of money over a period of time to resolve this issue. That's what you would get from the papers.
Yeah.
So
I would say that was disingenuous, though.
Okay.
I think they probably massively underestimated the issue as well. I think putting a pot of £400 million up there isn't going to scratch the surface.
No.
And and I think that's why later on they've brought the SRT, the pledge that all the developers and contractors that all signed up to. Yeah, where they effectively they will now survey all their buildings. I think it's over 11 as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everything over 11 metres. Survey their buildings, report back in terms of internal, external, like fire doors, and then they will, if there's works required, they will do it. They will pay for it, and move on. But the problem is, if you think, take some of your massive contractors and do some massive developers, they would have built hundreds and thousands of buildings over the last it scopes like 30 years, isn't it?
Oh yeah, so
it's 30 years.
It's 30 years defect liability from everything that they've built going backwards, 20 years on everything that's new, and bearing in mind it used to be 8.
Yeah.
Right, and contract used to cover you for 10. Right, you used to have it for 10 for contract because the contract was generally better to go after someone than defects liability. So you'd have a longer contract than defects liability because that's what you chase people on. I think that the reality is that the government said they would put a load of money to one side to facilitate it, and the reality is you only got access to that money if you had no one to chase.
Yeah, but then they would chase as well. They would chase for you.
Yeah, and if you went for the government money, you had to demonstrate to the government that you were chasing someone actively, or there was no one to chase. So that was it. And the reality was you'd then get the money, you'd then go and do the stuff in theory, and then you'd still be pursuing whoever was responsible, and then the government would basically recoup money off them legally. That would be how they would deliver.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, you know, I've sat on every side of the fence in this situation, and sitting on some of the developer sides, looking at some of the BSF funding that's been approved. Some of them are just way over the top, like things that can take off buildings that don't need to come off. And I mean, that's completely wrong, but that's just, I guess if you're going to go for that money, you'll get as much as you can. But once it's been awarded by government or the BSF,
done.
That's it. The developer has to pay it. So that a lot of them have been incentivised into actually signing the pledge to avoid that scenario. So I don't think that was the government's intention, but actually it worked quite well to get everybody on board.
Yeah. And I think the government were really heavy-handed with it as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think, to be fair, for the right reasons, I think in reflection, I do have an element of, and I have to be careful because people will jump all over me, I do have an element of sympathy for a lot of developers and a lot of constructors. I have a far more sympathy for those that are involved in it, right, who are living that pain day to day, everything associated with it. But I just think the problem is that the world was just not set up for these materials. We didn't really understand what they were. We didn't understand the impact. The guidance was basically written badly.
Yeah.
It was written in a way that didn't make sense. When you talk about limited combustibility and the way that definition has changed, and obviously building regulations being a manifestation of public opinion, right? That's broadly what it is.
And ADB is just a reflection of that, ultimately.
100%. And then you say to your average Joe on the street before Grenfell Tower happens, do you care if your building's Euro Class C or not? And they go, don't know what that means. Then obviously after Grenfell Tower, you then say to them, would you like to have a building that's got, you know, walls that could burn? And obviously the answer is no. And then obviously the government goes straight to the end of where that capability is and say, right, A2S1D0 or better, which basically means you're building your walls out of rocks.
Pretty much, yeah.
Which is basically where you are. So we've gone from an acceptable measured amount of combustibility in a wall product, which would be okay, because we do expect fire to move slowly up a building, because that's just the way it goes.
If anyone's ever actually tried to send a light to anything that's Euro Class B, and I'm not saying
good luck.
Yeah, it really won't do what you think it's going to do.
No, absolutely. So I think to some extent there was an overreaction to the expectation. So you go straight to A2S1D0 or better, which I think is a step too far, to be honest. But let's start there, right, and rein it back over time, maybe. But because they went so far that way, everything that was tolerable in the middle just seemed like it was berserk, right? So anything in between that we would say now, even now, we would say, actually, we could rein it in a little bit. It's because they went so far the other way that creates the problem in the EWS1 FREW.
I'll give you the two-stair scenario as well.
We could talk about two stairs all day long, couldn't we? Absolutely.
Let's do another day on that one,
Yeah, but I think, for me, that's the issue, because it was almost the first time you had a performance criteria written in building regulations as well, because everything else isn't performance based. Like it is A2S1D0 or better written in building regulations.
Yeah, I think Regulation 7's been good actually, because it has set it out very black and white what it needs, and the fact it's even got a list of exemptions shows consideration, and it's relevant. You know, thermal breaks, sealants. You know, a lot of people don't realise the intumescent cavity barriers, they're technically combustible because they react to fire.
Yeah.
But it's actually given you a list of things that are exempt, and there weren't. I mean, it's better now because there's more products that are non-combustible.
Yes.
But actually, when they just declared it's all got to be non-combustible,
there
weren't products out there like cavity trays.
In cavity trays, no such thing.
Yeah, just plastic cavity trays, what everyone was using. But really, what's the fire load? But there was no consideration for that, and that wasn't in the exempt items.
No, exactly.
But now, obviously, markets developed and
100%. But I think the problem is that Reg 7 is written brilliantly. It's very, very clear, and there are exemptions. That's fantastic. The problem that you have when you consider to the existing built environment is that it is very up one end of the spectrum, and without that being a requirement, nothing else would have ever met it. It would have been wild to have A1.
Well, I don't know if you. So the building regs say that breather membranes or membranes are exempt from the Regulation 7 combustibility requirements. But approved document B says if it's a HRB, then they have to be at least Euro Class B or better.
And there aren't any.
Well, there are now, but there weren't. There weren't, for sure. And again, that's straight away, it's a discrepancy. It's like, you could have fixed that because you've just updated the guidance. You could have changed that.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's still small discrepancies, but it's a lot less loose. It's much tighter.
You could even go and start talking about laminated glazing on balcony balustrades, right? I mean, that's wild because it's got a very thin piece of plastic inside the glass to stop it breaking and smashing.
And in reality, if you actually try to light it, it wouldn't do anything.
But the alternative is monolithic glass, and that's even more dangerous, you know. Yeah. But not from a fire perspective.
No.
If it lands on your bonds.
Well, again, this is where
falls off 10 stories of building.
I always think about this, and if you put things in perspective, you've got a lot of cladding systems buildings that are held up by aluminium bracketry, which is 600 degrees alley fails anyway.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of questions about window frames as well, being UPVC alley, facades falling after in fire. But if you get a hot enough fire in a flat and it flashes over, you're gonna get 600 degrees maybe at the point of entry into the facade, and the cladding's gonna fail. So you're gonna have bits of cladding falling down anyway.
Yes.
That's not really covered in
the
regs or the guidance now.
No.
I mean, you need to be cautious not cautious, but think about the fire service and their access and safety during the firefighting operations.
Yes.
But that's not really part of it. This doesn't really come up.
No.
So given the love in the room for Regulation 7 and Tom's sympathy for the developers, does that indicate that perhaps, I'll put this to you, Anne, are we doing everything right now? Is the construction industry actually improved after 7 years? You must be very impressed with what you're seeing on site.
I mean, I'd start off agreeing with Tom in terms of there's been a lot of changes. I think a lot of it's been knee-jerk, a lot of it's been over the top. I think fundamentally, if you look back at the likes of Grenfell, it wasn't that the design was wrong. We know that.
Yeah.
And the guidance wasn't abundantly clear. So in my mind, the way to solve that is fix the guidance, make the guidance clear.
Yes.
Okay, that's one part which was partially done, albeit we could say it was over the top, but that was partially done. Then we've introduced a whole new building safety regime where we've got the gateway system everyone's got to go through, which will slow down construction like something chronic. And I'll be honest with you, I go on site on a regular basis, my team do, on new build sites, and it's the same rubbish being done on site that was done wrong before. Mm-hmm. And none of the changes that have been made make any difference to that at all. And it infuriates me beyond belief. All the changes we've had to put in place in terms of design and build and all that sort of stuff in actual setup, ultimately, if there's a big company that have got to deliver X amount of units by X date,
they'll cut corners.
They'll cut corners at the end. They always do. And we're there to catch that, and we catch it as much as we can. But not everyone's being caught. Not everyone's being inspected the way others are.
No,
it's crazy.
The problem you've got is the oversight isn't quite there yet.
No.
I think there is a belief that the building safety regulator is the catch-all, but it's not. It's the catch-all for the design.
Yes.
And even then, we'd probably argue about the competence of those ratifying the designs from a regulator perspective, because they're not going to give you advice back.
No, but I think, again, that's why they brought in that bit, the BSA PD, Principal Designer role.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll stop doing acronyms. BSA PD role. And that's because effectively what you end up having is your in-house design checker.
Yes.
That does what we would have previously said was like the light building control touch review.
Yeah.
Then it goes to building control. Then it goes to the regulator.
Mm-hmm.
And that process is, there's so much more checks on the design level, which is great.
Yeah.
But then, like I say, it just goes to site and then...
Well, you're always going to have problems at the coalface.
Yes.
Always.
But how do you... I mean, I know other countries do have it where the fire engineer, for example, will be involved with a project from start to completion and will actually sign a certificate at the end to say this building's been built in accordance with the design for the fire safety aspects of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's probably headed. But as a fire engineer, unless I've got somebody on site at all times, maybe even more than one person, because there'll be different things going on in different areas, how the hell are you supposed to take full responsibility for something?
Yeah.
I don't think you can.
No. And that's in, Italy, that role is a role that you take on and you are criminally liable as an individual if that building is wrong.
Yeah, and
you don't have that.
Yeah, in the instant, because of the gateway changes. And
there's a tower in Pisa, isn't there, that's been really badly...
Yeah, they were going to underpin it, but then people stopped taking pictures.
Yeah, they just left it where it is, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll prop it where it is so we can take photos.
Yeah. It also proof that subsidence is broadly irrelevant and it's just people underpinning for the sake of it, because that building's been okay for years.
The new gateway system is infuriating at the moment, because obviously we've gone from a system where people just proceeded on site at risk, being fairly confident their design will be approved during the build, to now having to have full design sign off before you start on site.
Yeah.
I think it's a positive way to go, and it's something Scotland have been doing for a long time. This is a change is difficult because it's just causing a big delay in construction. Or, as we're seeing elsewhere, people are just starting to build smaller. And same as why a lot of people built buildings that were 6 stories but below the 7 stories but below the 18-metre threshold.
Yeah, the 17.99 metre tall building.
Yeah, so now, because if you go 5 stories now, then you need sprinklers and non-combustible some materials. Now everyone's building 4-story buildings.
Yeah, of course they are.
So, and it just changes what gets delivered.
Yeah, and people will see that as organisations trying to work around a high level of safety requirement, but it isn't actually that at all. It's about the fact that they're just not. They know that the delays will be so significant to their project. So actually, the profitability that they would lose, or over a period that takes an extra 12 to 24 weeks, for example, isn't worth the pain of an extra story. We'll just build it a story smaller, make less profit, and be happy with what we've delivered. I
think there was a statistic released on LinkedIn, wasn't there, about the response time of the regulator? And I think on one particular project, or somebody's project, they said they've had a 20-week period, had feedback, provided more information, and they're being told they might have to wait another 20 weeks.
Yeah.
And then some statistics were put on saying that, I think, I can't remember the exact numbers, but there were 1,000 applications have gone in.
Yep.
146 had been approved. 24 had been, more information was requested, or rejected, was it?
There was 24 rejected.
And the others, more information needed.
It was basically 15% of applications had been successful.
Yeah.
That was the big takeaway.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there were only 3 that didn't have a human caseworker assigned to them, right? So out of those 1,000, a human being had been assigned to all of them.
Yeah.
But then when you looked at all of the problems associated with it, you'd say, well, they're obviously struggling,
Yeah, but I think the problem is the regulator wasn't particularly forthcoming in what they would expect within a Gateway 2 submission, because I think we know, well, a full design package, you can send them a full stage 4 design pack, but there's going to be hundreds of thousands of bits of information to review. It's not practical. I think having I think now everyone's going down the more concise route of having the Building Safety Act PD do like a cover-all report that covers all the different parts of the approved documents of the building regs, and then goes through one by one and says how have we demonstrated compliance with that schedule of the building regs. And I think that's probably what they want. I'd like them to say that's exactly what we want, and then going forward, everyone knows what they're doing. I can imagine the 24 that got rejected, they probably just sent in a fact packet design.
Well, yeah, exactly. Written on a piece of vellum with a quill.
I think the concern a lot of the developers I'm working with have, and a lot of the other consultants we're working with, if you've got to do a full design pack for a project that's 4 years long, you've got to get a smoke control system design and specification put in place for your Gateway 2 submission for a company that may not even be there in 4 years.
No, exactly.
So if you've got to change that product, you're going to go through the change control process, which is like 8 or 12 weeks. I can't remember which one it is, but that's another slowdown. But then potentially you might have to stop works.
Yeah.
So it's very, very difficult.
And the other thing is, a lot of the contractors on site that are doing the installation have got some sort of CDP element, or another acronym for you, Dave. Contractor design portion within their contract.
Yeah.
Well,
CDP,
Dave.
T.
And the problem is, you don't normally get your contract design portion done until they've been procured, which means not only have you got to do the designs too early, you've also got to engage your final contractor to do the design.
Yeah.
Because it's their design portion that they...
And I'd imagine they're going to price it all, because obviously the developer's going to want a price.
Yes,
so they're going to price it all. Yeah, can you fix your price for what you're going to do in 4 years, please?
Yeah, and the answer is
sure. Here's a big markup, yeah.
The answer is sure, of course we can. And then when you get there, you can't deliver it. Cause
I hope it will go into more of a staged situation where it will be substructure, superstructure, internals, because that way at least you can start doing some bits, and then you can delay submissions for stuff that you aren't even going to be designing that early.
Yeah, I think the problem is there is a lot of complexity in the design of the systems that need to go into the buildings.
Yes.
And a lot of that stuff requires you to have done a little bit of construction.
Yeah,
so
certainly.
Fully understand it.
Yeah, but as an example, fire stopping details, you wouldn't design your fire stopping details typically at like early REBA stage 4. As you're getting towards, you sort of review your subcontractor designs and get them checked and confirm they're all tested details. But you wouldn't normally do that 4 years in advance.
No, you rarely do it 4 years in advance. In fact, you're lucky to do it before you're on site.
Exactly. But that won't affect your supers or anything like that. That will just...
No, absolutely. But you should. I think there are a lot of organisations that are starting to engage earlier to do stuff. The problem you have is it front end loads your design with cost. Yeah. You're not going to get any of that cost back until you start to do some building. And actually, that's what's happened: is you do some building, you get some money out of your client, then you do a bit more building, get a bit more money, and it kind of flows. Whereas now, actually, what you're saying is to the contractor, do all your design now, then submit it, then wait. and then you've got to go and start building to get some money back. So actually there's a lot more risk in the design, and you've got to spend a load more money in the design.
Or you just build smaller.
Or you just build smaller and quicker.
Yeah. But going back to the actual original question,
I feel
no,
like
it's
you
not better
have
ones.
both gone off down some avenue that the rest of us will let you carry on into midnight just to carry on discussing.
Well,
We're going to
we
have
could
to
talk about it
start
till
to wrap
midnight.
it up.
I think what I would say is there is a lot of the gateway system is problematic for new builds because it delays projects and it requires you to do an awful lot more design a lot earlier than you historically would have done. People don't fully understand, I don't think. There's something that people would always say is this stage 5 design stuff. People are designing stuff at stage 5. It's not quite true. They're just doing their stage 4 while someone else is doing their stage 5.
The stages, they overlap because your later stages.
Of course.
Design,
So you will always get that overlap. You don't get that overlap anymore. So that is a massive sea change, right? And we'll have to get around that somehow. The other half of the Gateway 2 problem is buildings that do need remediation, and they need it for the sake of occupants that currently live in it.
Yes.
And the 8-week period is currently 20, and actually there aren't enough people in the regulator to go through those designs.
No.
And the things you have to get approved to go through Gateway 2, in my view, are wild.
And this, there is the opportunity to do what would be considered emergency works, and there's no clear definition on that at the moment.
No.
But ultimately, if you can consider it emergency works, they can do the work and go for retrospective approval.
Yes.
Which, I mean...
So it's seek forgiveness rather than permission,
Yeah,
right?
which, is a great way to live by, but I wouldn't say necessarily in terms of like fire safety cladding design.
No.
And also, can you class something as emergency works if the building's already had the cladding on for... You've known about it for 3 years. Is it now emergency work to do it now? I think you'd be hard.
I think this is the problem. So it's very difficult to say in a building that's got 100 flat entrance doors in it, it's emergency works for me to replace all 100 doors.
Yeah.
I think you're stretching it a little bit there. And they say, well, none of them are fire rated. So when did you find out? Well, I found out in 2017.
Yeah.
So actually, the difference between an 8-week wait and doing it today isn't actually that much in the grand scheme of things. But I think it is problematic to say the regulator will hold up works that you need to do.
Yeah.
But yet, in the same vein, they will always argue back to say, but you've known for so long,
Yeah.
so the time isn't a problem.
But going back to the original point, that all of this is happening, yet on site, still the same rubbish. Not always. And I'll be honest with you, I think actually when we're looking at remedial schemes, the quality of work is there, and because it's a remedial scheme and everyone knows that's what they've gone into, and they're normally like specialist facade contractors. And
Yes.
It's when you get the whole site construction, and that's when you I don't want to say corner cutting, but people don't necessarily know what they're doing. They're told to do stuff that they don't understand. And there's no kind of accountability for that at the moment.
Lack of competency.
Well, it is a lack of competence, but also I think there's a
Behaviour.
pressure, especially if you, Tom, you'll know probably better than both of us, but from a builder perspective, they've got a number of units to deliver on a certain date, and our site team will be pushing people to do that. They'll just throw anyway, here's a load of mastic, go and fill a load of holes. They won't actually consider the implications of it. And I'll be honest with you, they probably don't understand. So it's really tough. But, you hear the excuse, don't you, all the time? Well, that's the way we've always done it. And people still say that to me now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you've been doing it wrong, mate.
Yeah,
That's the answer.
But they don't care.
But I think the problem, and you raised the point, in that as soon as you start to get close to PC, as soon as the client realises that they're going to overrun, they will throw money at it like nobody's business.
Yeah.
And they will get the right people in. Let's go the right way. They'll get the right people in to do the right solutions, and they'll spend a ton of money on that specific specialist contractor.
Yeah.
But they could have spent 1/10 of that money if they had just spent it front end on the design. That's the problem.
Would it relieve the time pressure? I think the time pressure issue at the end is probably I'd say probably what largely causes a lot of the issues we do observe, because people are just rushing at the end.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're ever going to be able to change that, because unfortunately it's businesses where people...
Well, £500,000 a
pressure.
week fines off your client focuses the mind somewhat, doesn't it, when you're running late?
Well, especially if you're working with a HA and you've got a golden brick delivery date. And
I think talking about time pressure and running late, we're going to have to bring this episode to a close.
Good.
I know a couple of Furbies, you'll carry on chatting on the sofa all night. This would be interesting for you, Tom. I say, given your RAF firefighter background,
Yes.
and to me as an ex-airport firefighter. So the Fire Safety Engineering Group, FSEG, of the University of Greenwich require 1,500 volunteers to participate in a series of exciting aircraft evacuation trials featuring a revolutionary blended wing body aircraft. Now, this doesn't sound very exciting without a picture.
I was going to say I've seen the picture. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, so I'm going to point there.
I'll point here in case. Can you just point there, Anthony, just in case? So the
And
right
hopefully
shot they can
our
choose.
editor can add in a picture
Of that
a blended wing aircraft. Essentially, it's like a stealth.
It's like
aircraft.
a block of flats with wings, isn't it?
Oh, obviously, yeah.
It's all blended into one. Looks a bit more like a UFO. The FSEG, in collaboration with Cranfield University, will be running a series of full-scale evacuation trials from 4th to the 21st of February 2025 at their Bedfordshire campus. If you'd like to be a part of the future of aviation and help shape aviation future, follow the registration details in the link, which we'll post on our LinkedIn page.
So you're now doing FSEG.
So we need a picture
solid.
of a blended wing aircraft and a LinkedIn link.
So why don't we also say let's bring Ed Gallier on to talk about evacuation of
Aircraft.
Because the thing that worries me, Dave, is that experiment is to see if you can evacuate 1,500 people out of one aeroplane.
I know, it's mad, isn't it?
That's crazy. Unless they do 2 groups, it might be 750. Don't know.
That's still an awful
It's,
lot.
it's a hell of a lot, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what was a 777 carry?
People.
Yeah, don't know.
No, I mean, how many people? I mean,
I don't know, but it's not more than
it's got to be
400.
Yeah.
I was going to say 450, 500
Yeah.
maybe. I don't know.
The right number will be here. We're going to make sure post editing gets a lot of work to do.
400, maybe.
It's got to be. But it's going to be transatlantic because it's this like subsonic speed, isn't it? Just slightly. It's meant to be really, really fast as well. Anyway, it's fascinating work for sure. That's just going to be 1,500 chairs in a
Do you
school
think we should
classroom,
go?
isn't it?
Do you
They do
think
tea
we
and
should
biscuits.
volunteer for this and do a podcast live on scene?
Yes,
That's like my best idea ever.
it is. It sounds like a complicated idea nonetheless, but
No,
let's
maybe
do
we can
that.
sort that out.
I mean, you could set it up and not do it. Don't participate, just watch everyone else doing it and commentate on as it occurs.
Maybe we could eat food out of a small foil tin and pretend that we're on an aeroplane.
Okay.
But not evacuate.
Okay, Ed Gallier will be in touch then.
Yeah, we will do. Let's talk to Ed.
Okay, and with that, Anthony, thanks so much for coming in. It's always interesting and fascinating, and you're always a wealth of information.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd say it's a
You'd say the
interesting
mutual,
market.
however, it's not.
no. It's interesting. It's an interesting like sector and market to be working at the moment. But certainly,
Yeah.
I don't think we're finished where we are. I think it's going to keep going. So keep changing.
Yeah, it's frustrating, but we'll get there in the end.
It's frustrating. The right things are being done. It's just maybe a bit too far right one way and a bit not enough the other way.
Yeah, we'll get there in the end.
Do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, well, why not? I've got something to read, but I wasn't ready, Dave. I think it's important. I think it's important to note that we're an independent and neutral show and that anybody wants to get involved can message us on LinkedIn and follow our page or our website. We would love to hear from you. If you'd like to appear on the show in the future, comment on anything that we've said in the past and drop us a message and we will bring you to the studio to discuss. There is only one thing we've got to say before we go. You haven't talked about Backdraft. Go on to backdraftmovie.com, which is Dave's special
Is this the new
club.
Backdraft film?
No, the old one.
They're
Dave
doing a
does-
new one, aren't they?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
this is in honour of the 1991
Okay.
version.
Yes, Anthony, will you join the group?
Yeah, I'll have a look. Yeah.
Wonderful. And everyone else needs to also join the group. Link is here.
Are you going to see the
And
original one?
here's Kurt
Sorry, the
Russell.
new one. You're going to see the new one.
Yeah, well, this is our bid to
Look, there's a picture.
be invited to
Something.
to be invited to be the technical specialists on the basis that the fire science in the original one was so poor.
That was the whole concept of the film, though.
That's what made it.
Yes, that was the point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thanks very much.
Yeah,
thanks,
thanks very
Anthony. See you next week.
See you next week.